Himanshu Gupta. No, sorry, no, I practiced before we started and then I mispronounced it. Himanshu Gupta. So I said it right this time. From Solace. Now, Himanshu, we've known each other for a while. You've been a very kind presenter on a few of my engineering stream events in New York. Can I ask you, just to kick off, I'm going to put your LinkedIn and I'm going to put the URL for Solace so everybody can look those up. But it's still worth doing a bit of an introduction so people sort of know who you are and what Solace is. I don't know what the right order to do that in. I'll let you choose whether you talk about yourself first or Solace first. This is a market data audience. So that, you know us, you know the type of people I'm talking to. So off you go.
Sure.
Tell us.
David, thanks for having me on your podcast. I've been in the capital markets industry for about 15 years now. Started with Deutsche Bank as a grad, as an intern actually, and learned KDB over there. And that's where I got my exposure to market data, to be honest. Didn't know anything about market data at that point.
You will need 10 seconds, KDB from KX.
Yes. It's a very popular within the capital markets industry, columnar time series database. They're doing a lot of stuff in the AI space now too. But you'll find it in every bank, almost every other hedge fund, right?
Most people will know that, but I just, some might not.
And then I moved on to AQI Capital, and now I'm at Solace for the last 6 years. Time does fly. Where I'm here as a sales engineer, so I help our customers understand the technology, help our prospects adopt the Solace technology, and I focus especially within the capital markets domain.
And is it Solace? I mean, how do you say it?
Solace.
I say Solace. Yeah, I don't know if there's a British connection because Solace. I mean, you're New York based, but Solace is Canadian, isn't it?
It is a Canadian company, yeah, and it's been there for a long time. So I do prefer small stable companies. So over my career, I've been kind of moving on to smaller and smaller companies.
Well, KX was Irish. Solace.
Well, KX is Canadian, actually. The company.
Really?
Yeah, it's a Canadian company. The inventor of Q, Arthur Whitney, is a Canadian scientist.
Oh, well, we like our Canadians. I like Canada. We won't get into the politics of what's going on at the moment, but all fun and games. So look, again, this audience, David Anderson talking market data. So we're going to talk, you and I, market data. I mean, maybe that's an opening question. We're going to go into, I've written down on my notes, talk about latency, talk about message-oriented middleware, talk about cloud, these are some of the topics.
Right.
But your perspective, where you're sitting, what you've seen, what you're doing, where do you fit into the market data world? What do you see currently? What are the sort of big themes that you've latched onto in the world of market data currently?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the company, where we fit in the technology stack, and what we're seeing these days, right? So the company started, believe it or not, about 20 years ago. Been there for a long time, and it started within capital markets. So I would say 9 out of top 12 banks use us within the capital markets domain, and most of the hedge funds do. And the primary use cases are around market data distribution and trade order distribution. So for market data, let's say you have some sort of external feed, right? You're getting data from Refinitiv, from Bloomberg, whatever your feeds might be. You work on some feed handlers. We're not in the business of building those out for you. When the data comes into your company, you might choose to put it directly into a time series database like KDB, or give some other teams direct access to these feeds. What commonly happens, and the bigger the company, the more the requirement for this is that you put it onto a central messaging solution like Solace, and then allow Solace to handle the fan out to n number of teams down the road. So you might have the P&L team, the valuation team, the trading team, the analytics team, all sort of teams that want market data, but then they don't have to have these point-to-point interactions built out. You just kind of know, I'm going to require to just publish or subscribe to data from Solace, and that's all I need to care about.
And that's quite a specialized part of the whole market data stack, if we can call it that. I mean, so that, by definition, does that mean you partner with other, I mean, feed handlers. So somebody else would sort of be doing the feed handlers, and I presume also, workstation or applications or whatever south. If I can call the incoming feed handlers north and sort of consuming applications like workstation south, you're in the middle.
Exactly.
I mean, do you use that phrase middle-oriented middleware? Is that an appropriate
I mean,
phrase?
it still describes the core solution, but we have matured, over 20 years, we've matured a lot more from just data distribution to more of a platform and how you deliver, how do you deploy these brokers as well, from hardware to software to cloud. So there's a full platform now.
You just threw in a word there, which I did a quick print off of Solace just to sort of remind myself. And the word broker. Now, you're not talking about stockbrokers. You're talking about software
event broker
messaging. What's a broker in the context you're talking about?
Yeah, so some people are familiar with middleware, some people are familiar with MOMs, and really, like, I think this is the more latest terminology that is more common these days.
Educate us.
Yes, an event broker is really your messaging solution that allows you to decouple your applications. So as we moved on from these monoliths of the, let's say, early 2000s and so forth, into microservices model, one of the core challenges was that, well, if I'm going to break down this giant application into 10 different microservices, how do they communicate with each other? They're not just part of any single application anymore, right? So then you need to make sure that there's a very efficient way for them to talk to each other. And this is where an event broker comes into the picture in the middle. So yes, we do the market data distribution, but it's just any messages that need to go from one destination to another, right? And you don't want to build those integrations from a point-to-point perspective. Sure, if you have two applications that need to talk to each other, integrate them directly, that's totally fine. But what if when you start scaling, you have hundreds of applications? If you start building those integrations, you're going to get yourself into technical debt eventually. And if you needed to change something, then you would have to change all those other point-to-point interactions you build in.
Let's get a bit more generic, because I mean the problem that you guys are solving. Let's try and understand the problems that are out there at the moment. And I mean, again, I'm going to throw these in no particular order. There's latency, which is the speed of data. This data is coming in at a rate of knots. I mean, it's just, hundreds, thousands of updates per second. People are talking about milliseconds, nanoseconds,
Right.
So that's one element, the sheer speed. So there's speed, then there's volume. I mean, if we talk about things like Opera, the Option Price Reporting Authority or whatever, there is just some enormous dumps of data, also at high speed sometimes. So it's speed and volume as well. And then you mentioned the word scale. So I suppose, if you've got a 5-person company, which is, I'm curious when you mentioned hedge funds, if you've got a 5-person company, that's a much simpler setup. Getting the information between those 5 people, I wouldn't say is an enormous problem technically. Correct. Whereas if you've got 500 people or 5,000 people, that's another big problem. So you've got very fast, low latency data, loads of it, lots of users, and then you get into this concept of fairness. Does everybody get it at the same time and all that? I mean, these are the sort of, I presume, these are the problems that your customers are wrestling with. Is that where you come to the? I mean, what are the big element? I mean, there's speed/latency, there's volume, there's distribution to scale, and fairness in it. What else? Is there anything else?
Yeah, no, you had them all for the most part. Like, for example, high throughput and low latency is, when you say volume and latency, right? So high throughput, low latency are super critical in capital markets. So especially when we talk about market data distribution, it's like, I'm going to send you millions of messages per second because I'm tracking global markets. It's not just the US markets. I need to have a resilient infrastructure as well. I can't afford to lose
resilience,
the market data infrastructure at any given time because I have global trading going on, right? All those things come into play. So for example, from a throughput perspective, we can do millions of messages per second with a single hardware. You can do 12.5 million messages per second from a software perspective as well, which is a lot. And then when it comes to latency, if you're into like HFT kind of latencies, right? You shouldn't have anything in your direct path. So I wouldn't expect you to use a broker in the middle if you're trying to like shave off microseconds and nanoseconds even then. We're more in the low latency space. These are very relative terms. I've seen people consider seconds as low latency, right? So when I say low latency, we're in the microseconds space. Our hardware broker adds 18 microseconds of end-to-end latency, which is the fastest that I've seen from a broker perspective, a separate broker perspective. And the resiliency is a big factor. So when we started in the banks, we made sure that the product is capable of delivering all the features and requirements that a bank requires. Right? I think Barclays was our first customer. So back in like 2004, 2005. And really, like you have to make sure that you can support high availability. So if one broker goes down, there's a backup broker with exact configuration of all the messages replicated to make sure that my applications can fail over without any issues at all in less than 30 seconds.
I mean, is reliability, resilience more important than speed? I mean, is there a trade-off sometimes? I mean, you mentioned about brokers getting in the way. Are there some situations where if there's an absolute, the best possible, the lowest possible latency, would you design systems different? I mean, this is easy. All you do is put a bit of string between these things and they all work, isn't it? I mean, that's,
Sure.
What are you trying to pretend this is difficult? It's all...
Yeah. This brings a good point. And it matters whether it's in-memory messaging, as we say, where you're, or at most once delivery from messaging terminology, which is very common for market data distribution. And this is where, hey, it's okay if I lose one or two messages here and there. Right. Get me the latest information as quickly as possible. So I care more about speed rather than conserving all the data points, right? This is where we started with this quality of service, which is in-memory messaging. Yeah. There's no disk involved. We're just in-memory sending you the messages as quickly as possible. And this is where you can get those 18 microseconds of low latency. When we talk about what we call guaranteed messaging or persistent messaging, this is what other brokers do as well. They don't necessarily do the in-memory messaging part that we do. That's where you start looking at lower throughput, but high value. So trade order confirmations, right?
Well, you can't afford to miss anything. You've got to get everything.
So zero message loss. This is where I want to have all my resiliency. I want to make sure my messages are replicated across multiple sites. If I fail over, I need to be able to consume those messages. This is where I cannot afford any message. So we do both of those quality of services.
And is that, so you've got a sort of horses for courses, some user requirements, speed is everything, others this guaranteed messaging, but you can sort of use the word quality of service. I mean, as I understand this quality of service is like, there are lots of different layers or it's a spectrum, a bit like there's a spectrum of latency, there can be a spectrum of quality of service. And it's not that one is good or bad, they're different depending, and there's normally a trade-off effectively. I mean, there isn't the perfect. If there was perfect, there'd be a single quality of service and everybody would have that.
But there is a trade-off, right? Because for the direct messaging, you don't require a persistence layer. So you don't need a storage allocated to that. Within our appliances, we do have FPGA plates. One of them is dedicated to this guaranteed messaging layer. So if you didn't need that level of persistence, then you don't need to purchase that blade or have storage. So it's a much cheaper alternative to just do in-memory messaging.
And you mentioned other brokers. I mean, again, I asked ChatGPT about Solace and about your competitors or whatever. I don't think I got a particularly full answer. I mean, obviously, you're peerless. You are the absolute leaders in your field, and nobody can hold a light to you. but maybe a few foolish foes, go out there and try and compete with you. I mean, where in the landscape, it's a bit unfair of me to ask you to name your competitors, but what the hell?
No
Come
worries.
on, all
Yeah,
fair in love and war.
Yeah, totally fine.
And customers out there are going to look this up anyway. So
Yeah,
let's
no,
get it
totally
out
fine.
there.
And we play with
I mean,
others. That's fine.
and what exactly? I mean, a wonderful phrase I've used over many years now is this idea of cooperation or frenemies.
Yes,
Where
frenemies.
there are some companies you're sort of competing with, but then you'd also partner with. It's a
Right.
complicated mixture out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to jump straight in with my old alma mater. I mean, I used to work for Reuters. I got out before it became anything else. It then became Thomson Reuters and Refinitiv and now LSEG and what have you. And I was there in Reuters when we merged or took over Tibco. So I remember the TIB, the information bus, I think it was called, and Rendezvous, which was their messaging, which sort of got incorporated into what had been Triarch. And I remember there's this mixture of sort of multicast at one level and then point-to-point unicast at other level. It was this combination depending on uses. And I believe, RTDS is the current iteration of that. And they're sort of still going strongly. And then I remember in this message-oriented middleware, I mean, wasn't it IBM with MQ?
Yeah.
And somewhere on here, I got out of my depth when it mentioned Kafka compared to you. Help me out, educate me, and what's
right
positioning.
The competitive landscape has evolved over the years quite a bit, like you mentioned, and we've been there for 20 years, so we have seen all of them, and we're seeing new players emerge as well. So what we see at popular banks are they consolidate on 2 or 3 strategic messaging solutions for different use cases. And you put it right, we do agree that there are different messaging solutions for different requirements, and there are different types of messaging solutions. So what started as your queue-based message brokers, which is how we started, right? So we have topics, we have queues, first in, first out kind of functionality there, how we started. And that's similar to how you might have, let's say, TIBCO or IBM MQ. So it's very easy to migrate from those solutions over to Solace. Then in the last few years, we have had a lot of competition from different variants of Kafka. And Kafka is a different type of broker.
What is Kafka? I mean, I sort of... I don't know what it is. Tell me.
Yeah, it's a very different type of broker. So they said, so in...
Is it a company? Is Kafka a company?
No, Kafka is an open source project. And there are then companies. So there's a primary company, Confluent, that the project came out of LinkedIn. The founder started a company called Confluent. They provide, so any open source project, there's a company behind providing the enterprise version with support and all that. But then there's everyone else, like different cloud providers, who will have their own versions or managed service of that open source project. So Amazon has managed service Kafka, MSK, right? And then Azure has something else, and GCP has stuff. So Kafka is different because Kafka is a distributed log. So Kafka said, the use case was from LinkedIn about collecting streams of, just click streams. So who clicked on what and all that. So it's very important to see how a product, what was the initial use case? Why was it developed? For what purposes? And it was the scale of LinkedIn and capturing data like click streams. So it's okay if I lose a couple of click streams. It's not the end of the world. And it's a distributed log. So it's more about scaling, but not preserving the order of data.
And LinkedIn, in terms of scale, is another whole scale compared to our little world of capital markets. I mean, it's just millions and hundreds of millions. It's a different problem domain, isn't it?
It is. And for those use cases, order might not be as important. Right. So again, if you end up liking a post and I like the same post, does it matter if your like stats shows up before mine do? No, it doesn't. So that's why with the distributed systems like Kafka, the way to scale is, I'm going to get a little technical, is to increase something called partitions. And if you have more partitions, you can only have ordering within a single partition. So data across partitions cannot be ordered. So you lose ordering. With our broker and other brokers, we make sure that ordering is extremely important because you don't want to get market data or trade orders and lose ordering.
And I think I'm picking up something here as well. I mean, we like to think of ourselves in the market data world and actually in the capital markets as being special or at least different. And therefore the needs of the capital markets are different to social media, which I lump LinkedIn or Netflix delivering, video. I mean, we are a very special niche section of technology. And do you think that's important? I mean, is the danger that you can have sort of big tech companies who have big general skill sets or whatever, and they're not necessarily tuned or able to be tuned to our needs in our marketplace? We'll come on to cloud in a second, because I'd lump all the cloud providers, you mentioned Amazon and Azure, into that lump. And I'm sort of torn, but how specialist do we need to be? Or am I making a fuss over nothing? Is it important to be?
Capital markets has different requirements, very stringent requirements. So there are a lot of companies, especially all these tech companies that have started in the last 10, 12 years. And, let's say they can come out of California and they cater to a lot of these different industries, totally fine. But eventually everyone wants to start expanding into other industries. They always have a financial services vertical eventually. But what challenges you face is, first of all, you have to know intimately well what their use cases are. Secondly, what are their requirements? So yes, performance is definitely one of them, but the regulatory requirements, the resiliency requirement, the security requirements. And then the vendor has to make a choice. Like, do I want to get bogged down with all these nitty gritty bells and whistles that only this industry requires, and it's not going to apply to everyone else that I want to go after, or would I rather go after them? So that's why you've seen that, or at least we have seen that, when the big banks consolidate on, for example, I know a bank that consolidates on MQ, Solace, and Kafka, right? So for MQ, it's been there for a long time. It is the backbone of banking. So different banks, connect with each other using MQ. That's totally fine. That's not going to go anywhere just because it's very deeply rooted. People are looking to migrate from MQ to other solutions, but it's still heavily deployed. Solace, heavily deployed within capital markets for the performance, security, resiliency angle that I talked about. But we do have different form factors, which, like you said, we'll get into, which can cater to different use cases. But it's currently primarily deployed in the bank's capital markets division for the performance requirements. And this is where then the Kafka teams, right? Like, these are the other teams in a bank, maybe, retail division, compliance, that don't need the performance of Solace hardware, let's say. So they have now sort of consolidated because they've been hearing about Kafka on Kafka.
Yeah.
However, that's not to say that we can't do what that product is doing, because if we can do low latency, we can do high latency.
They might try and come into your space, but you can have a go in there.
Yes,
in
exactly.
that space. Let me pick up on something you said. You said a couple of times now, hardware, and you mentioned FPGA earlier on. Is it in this more rarefied world of ultra low latency, highly resilient, high throughputs, all the things we were talking about earlier on? Is hardware necessary as a solution? I mean, I'm not a technical person, but my simplistic understanding of this is you can write software, and you can write ever better software, ever more efficient software.
Right.
And that will work faster and faster, low and low latency or whatever. But you hit some sort of finite barriers or whatever you want to call them. And therefore, sometimes leveraging hardware acceleration is the sort of word that I'm familiar with, of which FPGA is one thing. But we've also heard GPUs now from NVIDIA and what have you. I mean, and you guys do that. You leverage that. I mean, educate me a bit more. Is that necessary? Is that because you hit those finite barriers where software, as brilliantly as you wrote it, it could only get you so far. Have I
Yeah, because it's not just what you're writing, but what you're, like you said, what you're deploying it on, right? So the gap between our hardware and software, we start to like minimize it from so we continue to improve our software as the underlying infrastructure continues to improve. So I did some testing with OCI's infrastructure recently, right? And
Oracle Cloud Infrastructure?
we were able to get into let's say 200 or 300 microseconds end-to-end latency on their bare metal servers in OCI, right? So not everyone needs 18 microseconds of latency. Some people find with 250 microseconds of latency, right? This wasn't possible a few years ago. We're able to get high throughput with our software brokers now too, because we continue to optimize the software, but then also the hardware that's running on it.
A software, so you used, it was the software that you wrote that enabled that.
Yes. And it's both ways. I'm saying it's not just the software, but it's also the hardware continues to get better. So with our hardware,
you mentioned
product,
you used the phrase bare metal. So in
OCI, the servers that are going to be offered by the cloud providers, they're getting better. The chips that they're using are getting better. Like you mentioned GPUs as well. We haven't done testing on those, but yeah, you can get really good performance on this infrastructure in the cloud now, that you don't really need your own servers.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, we said this was going to be a naturally flowing conversation. So cloud was on my list. It's been a hot topic in the market data industry for the last, I don't know, probably good 10 years, longer, but very much in the last 5 or 6 years. But there's a sort of lurking question mark that cloud's a bit of a generalist. It's good for big general things, but this rarefied, especially sort of more low latency type data, which again, I'm going to throw in that word multicast. Multicast is often a software technique that's used to address that issue. And this sort of broad comment, multicast doesn't really work in the cloud. Or does it? I mean, I'm getting mixed signals. But I mean, where is your cloud journey? What do you think about the cloud? How do you leverage the cloud? What advice do you give to your customers and to my audience?
Right.
Where does the cloud fit, and where does it not fit?
I think we've been complaining about the cloud for a long time, and I think it's time to stop doing that. Like that's the 7-8 years ago conversation.
Right. Okay.
The performance has dramatically improved over these years. And honestly, like, what are your requirements? Instead of complaining, tell me what your requirements are that will convince you to move to the cloud. If there are 18 microseconds, probably not going to get that. But like I said, we were able to get 250 microseconds. And I bet you many of the people that are complaining, they don't have those kind of microseconds requirements. It's just an easy target.
So they've heard somebody who does have an 18 microsecond requirement complain.
Right.
And they didn't really understand why they were complaining. They missed the 18 microsecond element of the complaint.
Yeah, like maybe in equities department, your matching engine is not going to go to the cloud, and that's totally fine. But a lot of the other stuff in your trading stack can potentially go to the cloud, right?
So what you guys, Solace, I mean, what's your journey with the cloud been? And tell us, just give us, educate
one of the
us
reasons why I think we're a great fit is our core product is very versatile in the different use cases and deployments that it accommodates. And that caters really well to the style of large banks, right? Where you have different teams, different organizations with different requirements, different preferences for different form factors. So like I said, we started with the hardware, but over the last 9-ish years, we've had a software broker that you can easily spin up wherever you like, on your laptop, on your on-prem server, on any of the cloud providers. And then in the last 6-7 years, we've had a cloud offering as well, where we will manage the deployment for you. In fact, to cater to our capital markets customers, we will even manage the deployment in your private cloud. So if you had Kubernetes running on-prem, and that's your private cloud, or you're on AWS and you have your own VPC there, you would rather that we deploy in that VPC, in that environment that you control, rather than our own AWS environment, we can cater to all of those kind of deployment preferences. And what that allows is that different teams with different throughput latency requirements can use different form factors, but you can still link them all together and have your applications connect to whichever broker they want using the same API. So behind the scenes, different types of form factors, but to the application team, it's what we call looks like an event mesh. It's just a layer of message distribution. So I've seen a lot of people look at, hey, we have all these hardware brokers. I don't like hardware anymore. This is 2025. We want to go to the cloud. Everything has to be infrastructure as code. I'm like, that's totally fine. We support that. We have the software brokers. Go for it. But then I think the real challenge, going back to the point of, why can't some of these things move to the cloud? The real challenge is, I've said it many times, a lot of these companies have already invested a lot of money into very resilient, dedicated infrastructure on-prem. It works totally fine. There are no issues with it. What are the incentives to move to the cloud? It always comes down to a business decision. If
it
the
ain't
cloud
broke,
provider
why
says,
fix it?
I'll reduce your bill 30%, 50%, sure, that's great. But if you're going to tell me that I have to pay by consumption, or I have to pay for really expensive servers to get the similar kind of performance, and then I have to spend like 3-4 years on a migration effort, then that's really why I could rather focus on some changes that would improve my business rather than trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist, right?
I've read about, I've heard about some people who've gone on that cloud journey who've found actually all those cost savings didn't materialize, and maybe people have said, actually, there are other costs that you didn't quite understand, so it wasn't quite as straightforward.
A lot of network costs, traffic, ingress, egress, all of those costs.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, what? Unfair to ask you, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's a bit of fun. Why not? I want you to sort of talk. I mean, the big cloud providers. You got your AWS. My sense was they were the first people that we saw in the market data world. They appeared first. I think Google, GCP, Google Cloud Products sort of came fast behind them. I'm going to pause on Microsoft. I'll put Microsoft to one side for a second. And the reason I put it to one side, I mean, you can't ignore Microsoft. Microsoft is enormous. Microsoft is a Goliath. But I just didn't hear much about Microsoft Azure in the sort of market data systems, market data distribution world. I know LSEG have gone into bed with them on the desktop. So yeah, of course, Microsoft at the desktop, but Microsoft as a feeds going into the cloud and feed handlers and all the stuff we've just been talking about, I hadn't heard much about them. And then the last one you mentioned, which I have a lot of sort of appreciation for, OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. They've been doing some really interesting things. Frankly, they're a late comer, and therefore they've been able to disrupt. I mean, it's a great thing when you come late, you can sort of see all the mistakes done before, and egress. Their big claim is we don't charge for egress. It's not because they're kind and nice. They are kind and nice, but they've realized that that's a way to differentiate themselves. So what? I mean, that's my simplistic little picture. What's how would you frame the big four cloud providers? I haven't thrown IBM. I haven't really seen IBM much at all. So
yeah, I mean, I put them in the pretty much the same buckets where people who were kind of very early on within the banking infrastructure, capital markets space to move to the cloud. They picked AWS because at that time it was the most mature option. Made sense. Probably got really good discounts as well. Then there are the second wave, which I would say GCP/Azure, and GCP has been really good with analytics. So like their BigQuery offering has been very popular. I know some hedge funds that I work with where they use both AWS and GCP based on the services that they like. Azure, now it's a different beast, but when it started, it really was, hey, all the companies that have their microservices product, let's say SQL Server, and they want to move that to the cloud, it's just very easy to do that with Azure, right? As opposed to SQL Server to some other offering that maps to that in GCP, let's say. So I mostly saw all the Microsoft shops moving to Azure. And now, obviously with the OpenAI investments that they've done, they're
Yeah.
really done really well in the AI space. And OCI, like you said, is the late comer, but they have the advantage of hindsight. But it's a challenge, right? Because like we were talking about the on-prem infrastructure that someone has invested in, now people have invested in a lot of cloud infrastructure. What are my incentives to switch providers? And they can say, cost savings, which is a great incentive. So you might choose to move your market data infrastructure to OCI to begin with and see what kind of cost savings you have, all that. But it really depends on what incentives you're getting.
That word switching, I keep picking up words. Switching has always been a difficult thing at all sorts of levels. It's I've got something, and then somebody comes along, and a swanky salesperson, a sales engineer comes along and says, "We've got something even better."
Right.
But there's pain in switching. It just isn't always painless. In fact, it's pretty always painful. And that's a great inertia, isn't it? That's the right word.
Yep.
And friction is another word that sort of comes. There's a lot of inertia and friction in all that. Where am I going with that conversation? I'm going to go shoot off in another direction because I just feel
Sure.
it's something we've talked about. AI, you mentioned it. I mean, my simplistic understanding is, the cloud story has been talked about in the market data industry, as I said, for the last 4, 5, 6, maybe even longer years. I remember Josh Carroll from RBC on a New York FISD event, and that's probably 10, 11 years ago. It's when we used to have all these panels about what is the cloud, because none of us really understood it, but I think we all do now. But my sense is cloud was a great enabler, as was the onward march of technology, NVIDIA, AMD, all the chips and whatever, has made AI possible. Because one of my earliest guests on this point, I think he might have been the first, Brennan Carley. Don't know if you know him, Brennan Carley. And I remember he used to be the sort of head of enterprise technology at what was Refinitiv then, Thomson Reuters. And I bring up AI and ask him, I said, David, I was learning AI in the 70s when I was at university, showing how old he is. But what's happened is technology has just moved. Moore's law on steroids and the cloud has suddenly made the concepts that existed in the 70s possible. And it's all now sort of, the last few years, it's Gen AI was the whole thing. Then you kindly stood on stage earlier this year when we were in New York together and did your little party piece on agentic AI. Again, agentic AI. We've only been talking about for a year or so, isn't it? It's the sort of...
It already feels like it's been a while.
I know. These things sort of, but here's a bit of a but with all this. For market data, where are we really able to use AI? I'd say AI and machine learning came first, then generative AI, which I think is a derivative of machine learning. It's one particular, and then agentic AI. They've all sort of come along.
Right.
They're all great fun. I love them, but are they really being used in anger? What are you seeing out there?
So I think there are definitely legitimate use cases around it. So there's a lot of hype. There's all this, you think AI is a bubble. That's more from the investments approach that I see, companies getting overvalued. So forget all of that. Are there valid use cases? Absolutely. And that's what a lot of companies are focusing on, the real use cases. So when I presented at the FISD event about agentic AI, I said, here's a lot of art of the possible. I'm not expecting anyone to be having an agent.
You were playing with it, weren't you?
Placing orders, right? But here's to give you an idea of what's possible. You could theoretically, give autonomy to an agent that says, hey, if you were to ask ChatGPT right now, what stock should I buy given these parameters? It might give you an answer, and you say, okay, fine, I'll buy that stock. Obviously, you shouldn't do that, but I am seeing in these large institutions. Again, not so much on the market data space right away, but automation, infrastructure rollout, a lot of the sort of the nitty gritty stuff that happens behind the scenes. How can I make my life easier, and how can I have agents helping with that? So a lot of code deployments and checks that are run on these deployments, sanity checks to make sure things look good.
You another word, automation. I mean, now that's where it really can play a part. But you saying that maybe it's not yet obvious in the market data world. You don't exist just in the market data world, but I do. So I'm going to pull you into my world only. But I mean, when you talk about a system like that you provide, the Solace middleware, all the stuff you do. I mean, where can AI work with that? I mean, can it help with the management of it, the automation of the tuning of it? I'll throw another question that I've been talking about recently. You graciously have come along a couple of times to my FISD engineering stream.
Right.
And recently I've been asking the question, what is engineering? You're a sales engineer.
Yeah.
And I was sort of thinking, okay, what actually is an engineer? I even looked up, I think, the English definition. But I always thought of market data engineers as really, they had these sort of oil cans. And when the market data system was squeaking a bit, they put a bit of oil on it. Or they get the spanner out and tighten up. I'm being facetious,
right.
But they were there when something wasn't quite working right. They would tweak it and do a config or something. But then somebody said, well, but all these systems work really well now. And all, I would call that the plumbing. I would still say that Solace is in the plumbing of market data. I hope that's not a derogatory. I don't think it's derogatory. I don't mean it in a derogatory way. But then somebody said, and I've heard this before, I said, well, where is the cool place to be at the moment? And the phrase analytics sprung up. And the way I think of analytics is you've got all the plumbing that is about getting you the data from, exchanges, from Refinitiv, from Bloomberg, and then through to thousands of users and all the things we've been talking about earlier in this conversation. But once you or somebody has the data, what are you going to do with it? And that's this analytics. It's models, it's algorithms, it's all that stuff of like, okay, I want to make some sort of sense out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, is that something you think about? Is that something Solace has got some skin in the game on? What's going on?
Yeah. I will briefly correct myself on the previous question. I did attend a talk yesterday where they actually mentioned a company, RBC, mentioned what they're doing with Gen AI, agentic AI, all that stuff, right? And a lot of banks, I've seen that use case where creating research reports and sort of client-facing collateral around what ideas and all that, and that can require market data or having some kind of chatbot interface to say what is happening in the market right now for this stock, where it has to go to an analytics database like KDB to get the market data, maybe sentiment analysis and all the SEC filings, all that stuff, and then do some analysis and then cater that to the end user. So that is a valid use case that I have seen, which does use market data. So I'll correct myself.
And there's lots of IPR, intellectual property rights, question marks with that. But you're right.
Okay. Now going to the next question. So yes, I think I've been in engineering for 15 years, and there's a whole stack, right? There's the data center layer, which is the actual hardware that's sitting there. There's the networking layer. There's these chips, right? And there's a whole stack of different components that come, right? And there's the software. Then within the software, there are all these different categories of, or am I doing messaging or plumbing? And am I doing the analytics a little bit higher up? Then there's, queries and dashboarding and so forth. And then you're just writing emails at the top level. But point being, it's what interests you. Each level is very important. If you didn't have the plumbing, you wouldn't have the data to do the analytics. If you didn't have the analytics, you wouldn't have the next higher up level where they wouldn't be able to drive in insights from those analytics. Where do we come in? We said we are going to focus on this one little thing of distributing the data to whoever needs it as efficiently as possible in any way. So we make sure that there are these things called micro integrations, which allow data to be on-ramped from different sources and then be offloaded to other sources. So we partner with a lot of companies in different categories. So KDB being one of them, where when I joined 6 years ago, I worked with KX and they built an integration with us where you can spin up a queue session and say, I want to subscribe to this data from Solace. You'll get real time, whatever data it is, market data, trade orders into your queue session. And then you can do analytics in KDB. So we don't care how our data will eventually get used. That's up to you to decide, but we'll make sure the data will get there. Going back to your analogy, we'll be the plumbers. You decide what you want to do with the water. You want to drink, you want to shower, you want to make a cup of hot tea, up to you.
Yeah. And I think that micro integration phrase you just use, I pick up on that. And a few of my podcasts, I've talked to people, I suppose in a perfect world, if it was possible for Solace to do everything and to put Bloomberg and Refinitiv and LSEG and Deutsche Börse out of business, hey, all fair enough of war, you would do it. But in reality, being a specialist is a safer area and ultimately a more profitable area. But if you do that, this is a question. I believe the trick is to have all that micro integrations or APIs or whatever, so that you can. I've used this phrase with them. How well do you play with others? Because that playing with others, I think, is quite important.
So because we sit in the middle, we have to play well with others. There's no other option. So I talked about our competitors before. We have integrations to our competitors. Whether it is you want to move data from them to Solace, great.
Yeah.
But then you also have to move data from Solace to these other products because the downstream 10 applications might be using something totally different. So we have to be able to accommodate everyone, right? And one of the reasons why I think Solace works really well for large institutions is because they have different teams with different requirements. So if I have a market data team that is pumping millions of messages per second, they can use our own protocol, SMF, to publish messages using Java API to Solace. But a common scenario is having a trader desktop, which needs to stream data onto a HTML5 dashboard, and that uses WebSockets. So our competitors can't do both of them. So we support GMS, we support WebSockets, we support AMQP, MQTT, our own protocol, and REST. And all of this within one product and not multiple different plugins that you add, right?
So that specializing in where you specialize, but having all that connectivity and openness to talk with other people and play with other.
Exactly. So we say, can you integrate with Bloomberg or these? Yeah, like someone will have to write the feed handler. We are not in the business of doing that because it just requires so much niche knowledge, right? Me coming from that industry, I know like a messaging infrastructure company shouldn't really get into that space unless they're building expertise into that. So we don't get into that space. I would mention BCCG OEMs, Solace, and we partner with them, right? So they actually use Solace as their internal distribution layer. They're a friend of ours, so we work very well with them.
They're a friend of mine. I had Bill Beards on the panel. I've got Maurizio talking at the London event, which will be next week. But it depends when people listen to this. It probably will have happened already by the time people listen to this. Look, Himanshu, we're drawing to a close. Actually, I forgot to say something at the beginning. You very kindly gave me some advice. I'm shifting these podcasts. I think I'm going to shift them to monthly. I could have tried bi-weekly, but because I've got a few trips coming up, I'm going to go monthly. So anybody listening to this, I am going to do these slightly, frequently, regularly, but with a bigger gap between them. Because I think, Himanshu, you said to me, you need to give people time to listen to them. It's an awful lot to digest with my sort of 40, I think this is going to be the 42nd episode. So, and I've only done them this year. But look, I promised you, what haven't we talked about? What hot topics? What is burning inside your chest and you're desperate to tell the world?
Yes, I do.
I haven't asked you. So tell us.
Yeah, as a company, we've talked a lot about this plumbing, this core product, right? We built a platform on top of it, but we actually have come out with a recent offering called Solace Agent Mesh. It's in the AI space. We talked about some of the use case of agentic AI. So a lot of the companies have already built several agents and they're looking to roll out to production, or they might already have. And a core challenge there is just with like any microservices in a large organization, how do you kind of govern them? How do you orchestrate them? So when let's say in a bank, if I'm not going to have direct access to one of these chat GPT or Claude, I might have an internal UI where I go and say, hey, what kind of data is available to me, or ask it some question about some data, and then it gives me the results. Behind the scenes, it has an orchestrator that takes that prompt and figures out, based on all the agents that are made available to this orchestrator, which agent needs to do which action. So there might be an agent that is responsible for HR policies, another one for employees' data, another one for trade order data, all that stuff. And this orchestrator manages all of those interactions and figures out where do I need to send what data, what request, and then brings all of that together and then gives you the end result. So as a user, you don't need to know anything that happens behind the scenes. But the AI teams in these companies that are rolling out the infrastructure and these processes need to make sure there's appropriate governance. And my colleague should not be able to query my personal, employee data. All right. So all of the authentication, authorization, all of that stuff needs to be taken care of. And that is what Solace Agent Mesh is. It's an open source offering. It is available on GitHub. It provides you with a framework to say, here are my agents, plug them in very easily using open standards.
Is it the orchestrator, the orchestration mechanism? Is that
it has different components, but one of them is the orchestrator. And what it does is it uses Solace's broker event mesh layer to allow these agents to talk to each other in an event-driven way. So all the stuff that we've been talking about, microservices and pub sub and all that stuff, similar stuff. Now we're saying agents, instead of building point-to-point interactions between them, which can lead to higher latency, we're going to use pub sub mechanism. So we're bringing our core expertise, but we've built this whole orchestration layer, management layer, visualization layer, being able to trace which query led to basically what steps to execute behind the scenes. Right? Like when you post something on ChatGPT, you have no idea what's happening behind the scenes. Sometimes it gives you a result and you're like, wait, is this actually, were you hallucinating? When you do it at an enterprise level, you need to be able to trace exactly what query was run behind the scene to get you that data so you can validate it. And we are in that space now. So that is very exciting. We're seeing a lot of traction with it. And again, we're bringing our expertise of solving enterprise challenges.
I mean, let me ask you a sweeping question. I mean, where do you see us in market data going next? What do you see coming down the pipe? What's next? What are the next hot topics? You've always been good at seeing these next hot topics.
Yeah. I had an idea several years ago, 6-7 years ago, which hasn't really come to that much fruition, but I think eventually it will. Being a junior guy, I saw at that time that a lot of companies were doing very similar things from an infrastructure perspective, and where everything was leading to was managed service. So you see different companies doing the same thing. You say, hey, one provider will offer that as a managed service to everyone, and this guy can specialize in that and all that stuff. So when I see a lot of market data, feed handlers being written, a lot of tick data being captured, all of that to me is very similar stuff that everyone is doing, and they're spending a lot of money and resources doing that. What happens to the business is what comes out of that setup, the analytics, the insights that they derive from there. So what I was thinking would happen is all the cloud providers, and some of them tried to get into this area, like GCP has a partnership still with LSEG and Tick History, where all the tick history data is available in, I think, BigQuery. And all you have to do is say, what is Himanshu allowed to access? So if I'm not allowed to access crude oil data, then I can get it. But tomorrow, if I sign some contracts, I'll have access to it right away. When I was in my previous companies and a researcher said, you know what, we're going to start looking into crude oil data. And let's say we didn't have that from Tick History, our local data storage layer. I would have to spend a lot of time getting that data, reviewing it, backfilling it into a dev environment, showing it to the researcher. Researcher will validate, looks good. Then I would roll it out to production. It can take weeks to months depending on how fast things move. And it happens a lot of time. if all of that data, and we're talking like say historical data, so it's not really
Yeah.
latency. We're
Yeah.
going to forget latency, right? If all that data is already available in BigQuery and it's just permissioning, right? Like 2 minutes of or 30 seconds of permissioning change, and you just have the data available that you paid for. Isn't that great? And I know BigQuery and Google got into that. I think AWS was supposed to, or maybe they have a marketplace, something like that. I think that's going to become a lot more and more mainstream where data is already available and you just have to get access to it in the cloud.
Yeah, because I think there's always this issue. The owners of the data still want to make sure you pay for it and that they police their intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, if it's such a palaver, technical phrase there, to get access to the data internally and whatever, in other words, again, you use that phrase, managed service, and again, managed service in the cloud or something. Yeah, I think there's a lot of efficiencies to be had out there. I think that's a really positive thing, but there is a negative side to that. And again, I'm going to finish on a slightly down note. AI is wonderful. I love AI.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing AI does is it creates efficiencies. It enables efficiencies. It enables us to do things much more easily and much more quicker than we could. But the downside of that is we need less people to do it all. So I think if I'm taking the view at age 66, I don't think I really need to. But if I can leverage all sorts of AI tools, I'll be better at what I'm doing, and therefore I could be a survivor. But for all the survivors, I mean, the question mark is, who's going to be left on the beside the road? I was seeing a LinkedIn post recently. How many tech companies have got rid of people or whatever? I mean, how many? He was commenting that on LinkedIn there's a lot more open for work type situation. So I don't know. I mean, we were chatting about our relative ages. I could be your father. I'm half my age.
Yeah.
I don't really care about this because I'll be long gone. But I mean, it must be a worry for somebody in your generation. I mean,
and more so, I just had a daughter for my daughter's generation, right? So the world has completely changed. It's such a big deal, and every industry is going to get impacted. I was recently reading something about a digital actress that they're looking to have agents represent Tilly Norwood or something. So the entertainment industry is going to be completely flipped. Anything around creating content, designer industry, marketing, everything is getting disrupted. I think eventually what it comes down to is if we scale back and say humanity itself, we've always tried to make our lives more and more efficient. And it's up to us to figure out how can we add value to the world, right? So if now the things that we took for granted that we were doing now can be done by these agents, that's fine. What can I do with that as a tool and upskill myself to add a higher level value?
And it's that word tool. It's a tool. And if you can teach yourself how to use that tool, there's still value. Digging. Yeah, you used to dig with a shovel, but if you can get a mechanical digger, that's a lot better.
Right.
It doesn't replace you. You've got to still use the mechanical digger or something. I'm mixing the metaphor terribly, but I think you're right. I mean, my daughter is 27. And what I don't know. Sort of where the jobs are going to be.
The biggest challenge is to the grads coming out of in the job market right now, because we're in a nebulous space right now. Things haven't settled in, and the companies are being really cautious. So I heard this in a video recently I was watching, that we used to have a pyramid model where you'll have the interns, grads, and then they become managers and so forth. You climb the ladder. Now it's a diamond shape. So we still have the middle management, we still have the executives, but the base layer is disappearing, and which is sad. And we're going to see the impact of that in 10, 15 years when these people are supposed to move on to the higher levels.
I'm going to pick up another analogy. I've gone off in a different direction. But all the offshoring and outsourcing to India.
Yeah.
I go out and teach my course in Bangalore, and I know that some of the banks out there, the problem they've got is they pushed all their sort of quote unquote junior repetitive work out to places like that. And And that used to be done in London or New York. But the problem is that when they want to then recruit at the mid-level job, which they'd normally go and look at that pool of people, those people are excellent people, but they're in Bangalore or Hyderabad. And it's not as easy to just say, oh, yeah, can you come and do this job in London? You know, it doesn't.
Right.
I mean, maybe the mid-level jobs will be in Hyderabad or Bangalore. I mean, I've swerved off the AI conversation, but it just has some similarities.
It's true. If you look at what has happened in the 10-ish years or so, the type of roles and the work that was kind of offshored has changed drastically. It used to be very much, let me take advantage of the cheap labor and time zone difference so that when people here in New York on the East Coast are sleeping, someone else is kind of doing the work, and then they'll hand it over here and they'll do the business work over here. That's all changing. Companies are going all in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Pune, and they're building like big headquarters over there and saying, we're not just going to hire the entry level people there. We're actually hiring the top notch people from IIT, experienced folks, sending people from here to there to lead those people. And now you have principal engineers, distinguished engineers here. And I was just telling someone yesterday that more and more, they're starting to, if not making the decisions yet, they're starting to definitely influence the decisions. And it's just a matter of time before they make the they're the decision makers.
No, there's a massive. I mean, gosh, we're out of time, but talking about India and talking about China, I mean, the world is changing. AI is a big thing, but geopolitically, forget your politics. Just economically, the world is changing. It ain't what it was when I grew up, and even when you grew up.
Even the last 15 years is not what it was.
I know. Complicated stuff. Come look. Himanshu, this has been a pleasure, a real pleasure. So yes. I knew it would be. I'm going to ask you to stay on the line. Don't rush off. I say this to everybody, but a big thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in person again.
Thank you so much. Pleasure's mine. I'm honored to be on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care, Dave.